the end of X'10 Canada. I'm here with Josh from Lionhead Studios, and the question I wanted to ask you was the transition from Fable 1 wasn't done directly by Lionhead, but now 3 years, right?
Well, so the history is a bit more complicated than that, but in a quick nutshell, Fable was started by a satellite of Lionhead, a satellite studio called Big Blue Box. But before Fable came out, they were completely kind of pulled into Lionhead, so it was actually developed by Lionhead at the end for Fable 1.
Yeah, I wasn't sure of the history. I know originally it was a sort of side project that became something that now, I would say, one of your flagship titles.
I've been lucky enough to be part of the team since Fable 1 days, and I think the way, at least for me, I was there the last year and a half, and I would say nobody really expected it to be a flagship game for Microsoft. Like, we knew that we believed we were making something good, and I think, especially toward the end of Fable 1, you started to say, hey, it may not be everything we said, it was going to be in the press, but it's still a really good game. And now, with Fable 3 coming out this year, it's clearly, it's become a pretty big franchise for the Xbox, not just for Lionhead or Microsoft. It's a core kind of first-party proprietary game to Xbox.
Now, you're the lead designer. The famous personality from Lionhead is Peter Molyneux. How involved is he? Is he just in Fable 3 itself? Is he reviewing it every now and again, or is he really hands-on on the project?
So Peter is definitely the kind of the final word. He has final cut over everything. And what we do is we sit down with him definitely at the start of the project, review what we're going to do, and then we have points on the way where we do playthroughs with him, talk about the game, change things, add things. So he's definitely very involved through the whole thing. But he's a good studio manager, and he lets us kind of do our thing as well. And it's very much like, I think he said recently on joystick.com, that it's very much a team effort, and it's very true. There's people like me, there's our art director John McCormack, there's our studio head Luis Murray, there's Simon Carter, who's our technical director, and everybody's been on the game since it started. So a lot of the leads on the Fable team have been there since Fable 1.
How big is the team actually?
Oh God, smaller than most of the other games you see here, but I can't remember the exact number. We're not huge. At our highest number, I think we're still under 100.
I'm always under the impression, I like to think when I look at games developed by smaller teams, there's always a lot more handcrafting and more character to the games. Studios that have like the 300 team so they can crank out that game in a year, it might be a great game, but it lacks that sort of handmade approach, if you want to call it that way.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. There's lots of ways. Making a game is not really a science yet. It's like we're getting better at it as a business. I've been doing this for 15 years, shockingly. And the thing that's interesting is it's definitely not a garage band anymore. My first job, there was 15 guys in a loft, right? And now, Fable, like I said, I don't think Fable's quite over 100 people, but it's right at the edge. But you look at other games, I wouldn't say they don't have the handcrafted approach, maybe in my opinion, but the production value sometimes is so high that maybe how do I even say this? Sorry, it's a great question. I don't have a great answer.
I guess maybe they polish out the charm.
That's one way of looking at it. I wouldn't. It'd be hard for me because I feel like while I'm competitive with these games, they're also we're also all doing our own thing. And so one of Fable's things, like if you look at let's look at Fable versus some of the other games on the floor here. For us, charm is a big deal, but humor is a big deal, right? And our story is a big deal to us. And sometimes, those are enough. Like if you put the humor in the right place, you tell a great story, and you pull people in emotionally, that's enough to make a game competitive, even though it doesn't have a 300-person team.
Talking of humor, British game, I get the impression that nearly every game developed in the UK has some sense of humor. What is it about, as an American working at a British game studio, about British game designers that make their games have that different sort of sensibility to a North American or, let's say, Japanese title?
Well, I think there's definitely a history of British comedy that's very unique to that small island, and I think there's definitely a lot of pride that comes with it. If you look at things like the radio comedies that are still quite popular on BBC4. You look at great stand-up comedy that still comes out of Britain. It's definitely maybe more ingrained in the culture and the day-to-day life. I mean, I'd say, what a North American game might do better is kind of the action movie, summer blockbuster mentality, where I think humor is something that's it's more, maybe a bit more ingrained to something that's culturally relevant in Britain than it is, say, maybe someplace else.
I think also, game culture in the UK is a little bit different. I think, even though game culture in North America has become so big, there's still this stigma associated slightly with it in the mainstream. I don't see that maybe in the UK as much. People aren't as afraid to admit they're gamers, per se.
Definitely true in the UK. I would agree with that. I think, though, it's changing in the US, certainly from my opinion. I mean, when I was a kid, I was afraid to carry my electronics boutique bag home from the store because I'd be getting mocked at school the next day. I used to make my little brother carry the computer games home. So that's definitely, we've come some way from that. But it's certainly not as... what you see in Britain a lot and what you hear a lot about is people playing regardless of gender, right? You see people playing games together, boyfriend, girlfriend playing games together, and you're starting to hear more of that in the US as being something that a couple would do. But I think it's more common in the UK.
I definitely would say that Fable as an RPG sort of is a little bit more gender neutral in its appeal.
Yeah. Well, that's been an interesting thing about today, is actually the number of women who've come up and said, I love Fable. And I think, there's a lot of reasons. It's really hard to kind of get into that and really dissect exactly why that's the case. But I think there's a lot of things we do that are unique. I do think the humor helps. But the other word I'd look at is we do everything with a purpose. So we don't do hack and slash violence without a reason to do it. And everything has a certain amount of emotional pull to it, right? So I think when you look at some of the games on the floor here, they're great games, and they're great action games, but they don't have a lot of emotion to them. They don't have a lot of purpose to them. Fable 3 has a great underlying message to it. It has, we have an intention with the game, a thing we're trying to get across to our users, which is it's not easy being in charge. Being a leader is a difficult job. It's a game that we're trying to say makes you think a bit. And I think that, that helps perhaps not just with women, but we'll say that helps with people who are less interested in the action and only the action.
Let's talk about a little about morality in games, because Fable is famous for not just the black and white decision, but the gray areas of that. There's a few game companies, I think of BioWare will be one, Lionhead's another one, that have really mastered that ability to bring that into games. What do you guys do, and what do you to make it work?
Well, I think the first question is, what do we do to make it work? Is we spend a lot of time thinking about what's an interesting choice, right? I think just saying you're going to do a choice for a choice's sake is boring. And when we were starting Fable, it was maybe a bit more interesting because so many games didn't really explore the idea of morality. But now I think, you look out on the floor here, there's a lot of games that cover morality as an issue. And for us, what ended up happening, to your point, is we weren't interested in doing good, bad, right? I'm going to play a good character, so I make this decision. I want to play a bad character, so I make that decision. Because those decisions are boring, I think, at this point. They're very common. And, while they help give the player something to decide, they don't make you feel very much anymore. And so for us, the real key point is, what's a decision that is going to make the player put the controller down? What's going to be a decision they have to think about? And I'll say with Fable 3, we're going to hit you right square in the eyes within the first 20 minutes with a very difficult choice that is going to make you think a bit. And that's really what we aim for. We don't want to just do it based on morality. We want to do it based on making you care and feel and really have to think about who you are as a player and who you want to be as a character in that game.
I was just saying that, some games have a very simple, choice A, choice B.
Sure.
Choice B changes this building black. Choice A changes that building white. You guys don't do that. Choice A can do a lot more than just change a dialogue tree in a conversation.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And again, that goes back to making interesting decisions. For us, the idea of a choice, it really has to make you care, right? It can't just be so good evil. It's really got to be something that pulls at you a lot more. And so you're right, a lot of it does come from the writing, absolutely. Something else that really drives it home is the performance of our actors. And I think that's something that we don't talk a lot about in games, right? Because, our voice talent, especially over the last maybe 2 years, has gotten better, way better. But with Fable 3, we've tried to take it to another level by having a cast that's got, you know, the likes of Stephen Fry and Zoe Wanamaker, Michael Fassbender, Simon Pegg, John Cleese, Bernard Hill. I mean, real classics of the British stage and British film and British TV. So by having people who can bring character to our characters, it makes those decisions all the more pertinent, because in their delivery of the question, you feel something, right? And I really do think acting plays a huge part in making those decisions matter. I think the context in the writing, and I think also, to your point, making the impact of those decisions not just be good evil. Like, for example, in Fable 3, you're going to be pressed for a decision on, do you legalize slavery? Do you actually enforce it and enslave a colony, right? That is a decision as a player you're going to have to make. You could say that's a good evil decision, but without ruining the story, there's another thing pressing on you, which is, I don't want to give it away, but you could say that there's an ends justify the means thing on top of that decision that will make it more complicated and more difficult for you as a player, you know, when you're trying to decide what you want to do.
Now you guys have almost wrapped up Fable 3.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little about what's next for you or Lionhead, or is that still very hush-hush?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I don't want to go into too much detail. We're definitely exploring a lot of cool stuff, and I'm sure there'll be many exciting things to talk about in the near future.
And I guess we can cut this in afterwards. I didn't actually ask, if you were just to sort of list briefly, like, top 5 things about Fable 3 that are improved over Fable 2, or like what were the bullet points, you might say?
So, I mean, I've talked about some of these already, but okay, so I would say the top 5 things for Fable are, number 1, the journey to rule, right? This idea of being a revolutionary, making promises to people, and then, you know, in order to become the ruler, and then having to decide whether or not to fulfill those promises. That's, I think, a fantastic mechanic. I think it works really well in the game. I'm excited for people to have that experience. Our co-op gameplay is revolutionary for us, and I think, you know, when we put it out in the hands of our users in the media, we'll have to decide whether it's revolutionary in totality. But essentially the idea of saying, okay, you're not just fighting together, you're living together, you're having an experience together, and, you know, allowing 2 players to, you know, we're allowing 2 players to get married and have a family in the game. Really unique, really different. Going to make 2 players try to care about each other in a way they've never done before. You can actually hug another player in this game, which is something, you know, I can't think of another game you can do that in where it's even relevant. We've moved more toward an action game, so we still have our roots as an RPG, but the reality is Fable 3 has been crafted as a more action-oriented experience. So players who, I think, want a more action-focused game will be really satisfied with Fable 3. I think they'll actually find it really enjoyable and really fun. Players that like RPG games, I think, will still find what they're looking for. Big open world, big story, character leveling, character progression. But it's all been streamlined, so it's, you know, I think, enjoyable for both kind of sides of that coin. The humor, I would say, is another thing, that like number 4 on that list, that I think I'm absolutely thrilled with how it turned out. There's a lot of really funny stuff in there. I think there's very few games that have been funny, and I'm very proud of our writing team, and in particular Mark Hill, our lead writer, for everything he's done to make the game funny and keep our sense of humor despite a very serious story. And lastly, I think the story, right? The story and the presentation of the story and our voice acting really does make it all resonate. It all, you know, hopefully everybody will think this, but it all comes together as a package, from the chicken movie at the start to the last scene. You know, I hope that people will see it as a really cohesive experience where things were done with a purpose, and the story was there to both keep you involved but also make you think.
Sounds very good, and I'd like to say personally I'm very happy you're bringing it out on PC eventually as well. I'm a big PC player, so that's really cool. Good decision. And thank you for talking to us, and thank you for coming all the way to Canada.
Oh yeah, it's my absolute pleasure. I've enjoyed today, and actually these were great questions, and you made me think a lot, so thank you.
Thank you.
All right.